Thank you so much, John. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us here today. I will keep it as brief as possible because I know we have some time to catch up. John asked me to just quickly speak to how we got here as EDF. So EDF is an environmental organization. EDF is an advocacy organization. Why are we working on this issue? Well, about 10 years ago, our scientists started really looking into methane and really looking at this very potent greenhouse gas that they felt was overlooked in the advocacy space and in the policy space. Most people were talking about CO2, and rightly so. CO2 in the atmosphere for a really long time and causes global warming. But what does methane do? So they started researching, they started into looking into the causes, and they mounted a really successful advocacy campaign, really drawing the attention of people to it. They also, at the same time, the researchers also started crafting a solution set. And this was in the oil and gas sector. So we have a very strong oil and gas team that is looking at how to reduce methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. And often it's quite simple. It's as simple as maintaining your leaks, which is quite hard because you don't know where they are. Methane has no smell, and it has you can't see it. So how do people know where it is? So they started doing lots of infrared imaging, and they started really looking into, well, what valve would you have to close to really get to this? So that was kind of the beginning of how EDF got to that, and that group is still working really hard on getting companies to commit to reducing their emissions as much as possible. We weren't working on livestock, though. We were actually not working on livestock at all in EDF. We were only working on row crops. Livestock was considered messy, politically sensitive, and really hard to make change in. Anybody who's met me knows I love a little challenge. So when I came into this team, I was like looking at the data. I'm very sort of analytical, and I'm like looking at, where are the emissions coming from? And the majority of emissions were coming from cows, not from oil and gas. And I was like, hey, Fred, my big boss, why are we not working on this? So we started looking into it, and we discovered, I decided to look into the issue as really a failure of three gaps. So we identified three big gaps. We identified this ambition gap. So an ambition gap was really we're not trying to fix it, right? This was all the way at EDF, too messy. All the way with the farmers, well, our cows have to eat and they have to burp. All the way with politicians, we don't want farmers protesting on our streets. People were worried about taking on the challenge. So that was one very big gap. So how can you solve that? With companies, with farmers, with NGOs, with politicians, all across. The other gap was what I call the implementation gap. Implementation gap is a gap of where you consider that there are things that you know how to do, but you're not doing them because you don't have an incentive to do them. So this is things like covering your manure lagoon, which Fiona will talk about later. This is things like improving the diet of your cow. So this is not the silver bullet. This is not some magic that some scientist has to go and discover. This is not 3-NOP, some of the products that have been really hard to look into. The third gap, but obviously hard to do, right? There's a reason why they haven't been done. So the implementation gap, it's like we know how to do it, but there are economic barriers, social barriers, all kinds of barriers why we're not doing them. Third gap is this, what we call the innovation gap. And that's really, even if we feed our cow the best we can, if we give it the best health, because health is really important, if we treat our manure well, cows are still going to burp, and it's still going to be a lot of emissions if you add it all up. So can we do better? Is there a way to give a cow an additive or feed it slightly differently that would reduce that quite significantly? And that's where we have a lot of researchers looking into it. But when I say a lot, I was looking at this and I was thinking, there's one product that we're talking about that's really promising. That's really great, but why is it that I can walk into any vitamin store in New York City and have 20 brands of vitamin C, 20 brands of magnesium, and yet we have one potential product that's promising to reduce a gas that's literally heating up our planet? That's not good enough. How can we get more money flowing into that? We quickly discovered there's lots of impediments there as well. For instance, if you want to get a new product on the market in the US, you're going to probably be looking at about 10 years with FDA approval and a hell of a lot of money. And that's quite a big disincentive. It's also not good enough for the environment. We don't have 10 years. This is where I always bring up my kids. Somebody else said you talk about your kids a lot. Well, I do, because they are the reason why I do this. Not the only reason, but one of the many reasons. I voluntarily chose to have kids. And now I look around and I look at the news, and the natural disasters this year were out of control, right? Even though we need to bring down CO2 for the long-term warming, methane is what is going to be determining the warming over the next 2 decades. So if we want to slow down this train crash that we're on and really try to buy ourselves some time to adapt, because we have to admit, even staying under 1.5 degrees is going to be really hard. And I'm an optimist, and I'm not sure we can do it. So we need to start adapting. But that takes time. Adaptation is hard and difficult. So we need to buy ourselves some time, which is why EDF is really, really focusing on methane. I'm really looking forward to this day. Very pragmatic. At EDF, we work in what we call the matrix. When you talk to anybody EDF and you bring up the matrix, they'll probably roll their eyes and be like, oh God, because you always have to check with everybody. But what it means really is that we work in a multidisciplinary way. We have scientists, we have economists, we have lawyers, we have people who work with business, we have people who are specialists in government policy, and we all work together to try and craft solutions. We also try and do it with our feet firmly planted into reality. How does the world actually work? Often this means partnerships that are not self-evident for an NGO, working with businesses, working with financiers, working with farmers. We are the environmental group that wants to work with farmers, not against farmers. As John said earlier, we know farmers feed us. We need farmers. We appreciate farmers. We also know that if we want farmers to change, whether it's through this implementation gap or something else, we need to help them get there. We need to provide them with the tools. We need to provide them with the finances. Many farmers are living on very thin margins. How can we help them? So I'm very, very happy that John has invited 3 farmers here to speak about their reality. Very excited about this whole day. I'm not entirely sure of the run of show. I think it might have changed a couple of times. So I'm going to ask John to come back here and invite and tell us about who the next speaker is. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.